Okay, you know, I know you're gonna have to do this over and over and over again, but tell us what The Walrus and the Whistleblower is about.
This film is about an eccentric character named Phil Demers, who was a trainer of marine mammals at a place called Marineland in Niagara Falls, Canada, which happens to be where I grew up. He was a guy who had a pretty regular life until he got his job jumping off killer whales for $6.85 an hour. And he ended up finding himself falling in love with a walrus, which sent him into a whole different world on social media. He became a bit of a media sensation. And then a few years later, he left his job and made allegations of animal abuse and became a whistleblower, which catapulted him to a whole other level of notoriety. And his life has taken quite a turn since then. He's been embroiled in a lawsuit and in a very public fight to end the captivity of marine mammals. And so this film looks at both the issue of captivity, but also at the personal struggles of this one guy who's trying to make change in his own unique way.
Well, you know, we talked about this a little bit, and I actually want to go in a little bit deeper dive about the idea when you have a central, when you're a documentarian and you have a central character, it's a real person, of course, but your central focus is someone who has such a strong personality like Phil does. In a lot of ways, that's amazing and awesome because they're so dynamic and charismatic. But as a filmmaker, on the technical side, sometimes it cannot be so super awesome because they've got ideas about what they want to do, and they may not go along with what you want. They may take over your film in a way that you don't want. Talk about, and because I know you knew Phil, you mentioned that before, you knew him prior to this, but talk about how you kind of negotiated with him throughout this filmmaking process.
There was no negotiation at all, really. And that's something I think a lot of people are surprised to hear, is that Phil understood from the very early beginning that this was my interpretation of his story. And I laid that foundation with him very clearly because I wanted him to understand, number one, he had no editorial input to give. And also he had to trust me to interpret it accurately and fairly, as I would anybody else's story or anyone else who gave me their time. And so the access was incredible. Because we knew each other when we were kids, there was a certain kind of familiarity, but I did tell him, listen, I'm going to make this film and present it in such a way that makes my own point of view visible, even though this is your story. And I have to give him credit because for such a strong-willed person, he never once tried to control the story or tried to control how it is that we were going to shoot anything. If I had ideas or I wanted to follow things a certain way or not follow things, you know, sometimes he would call me and he would say something's going on, and I would say, okay, that's interesting and important to you, but it's not something that, you know, I'm interested in following. And he respected that. So I think what I hope the film is for people is a privileged inside view of what's going on with him internally, what's going on with the story itself. And they can make up their own minds of what they think, because a lot of people think he's crazy and really, you know, has gone too far or has hung on to the story too long and perhaps is sacrificing other things in his life for it. And a lot of people see him as a hero. You know, someone who has been willing to make this sacrifice out of love for a walrus and for the other animals. And so, and everything in between, really. And so I wanted to present this story in a nuanced way, get at some of that quirkiness that he has, his volatility, his moods, but his heart, his courage, his anger. And so I hope that people can feel that there is an outside point of view as the reflection of the story. But I think that I was quite lucky to have a strong character, but who didn't really want to take the film away.
Right. Well, you know, and the other interesting thing also is that you've got kind of two polar opposites, or not opposites, but you have two polar, you know, things. One is the story, the progression of the lawsuit, progression of, are we going to rescue Smooshi? The progression of, the policy that we're trying to get passed to protect the whales and and dolphins in captivity and what have you. And then of course, then we have his personal story. And so, as your approach, then I'm curious, because oftentimes documentarians have the story and then they're just, they map it out and then they're just trying to put footage and interviews in different spots to match that. But here you've got something where you don't know how it's going to wind up. So talk about how, how you went about it in that respect.
Mm-hmm. Overshooting. Lots and lots of shooting. Lots of shooting. And so going way over budget on shooting, basically. And just really trying to make these intuitive decisions. Is this good? Is this going to go anywhere? I mean, to be honest with you, I filmed a lot of threads that went nowhere and had to drop them in the edit suite because I had a little great scene or a great moment or the beginning of something, but it never really materialized. There were other stories too that I followed internationally that didn't have much to do with film. But I realized as I was crafting the narrative that no one else was going to have access to this particular story. A lot of people can make a film about whales and they can make a film about other things. And there's great films that have been made about the subject, but no one really had this kind of access to this particular story in this small town. And so I realized that was where the focus was supposed to be. And so in the edit suite, I just threw a lot of things out and then tried things a million different ways. It was a long editing process. And I think the structure of the film was definitely made in the edit suite once I knew that I had all the material that I wanted, and then could craft the narrative. But, there's some closure in the film on some of the narrative threads, but not all. And that
Right.
was another decision was, do I wait? How many years do I wait to see if, this particular thread is going to close and ultimately I personally love open endings in films because I think they leave you and they leave you thinking in a way that something that's really neat and tied up doesn't. So I didn't mind actually leaving some things open. But definitely it was an extremely creative process that was not manipulated from in the shooting days or even in the script days. This was really a film that was made in the edit suite, trying things out.
Well, listen, it's funny you say that because I definitely have questions that I don't want to jeopardize the viewers' experiences. So we're gonna, I'll ask you that when we're not doing the interview. But what I did want to ask also is, when you have a story like this that activists are involved, you've got a very defensive posture from in this case Marineland or whatever. I was very curious on how you went about trying to obtain footage other than when you were with him, because obviously you had access to him. But to get John and other people to maybe do an interview to get some of the Canadian politicians to talk. What were you viewed as as one of the activists and an adversary? How was it for you during the filming process?
I was not viewed as an activist by most people because my own background too is in journalism. So I worked at our public broadcaster making documentaries about very journalistic style documentaries, let's say. And so I've been trained more as a journalist and as a storyteller than anything else. So when I was approaching people, certainly politicians or other activists, they knew my background and they knew that I wasn't coming at this from an activist standpoint, and that I was interested in all the nuances in the story. I contacted Marineland several times. I wrote 9+ letters. There were phone calls and attempts in person to try to break through that wall. Because my dream vision actually when I first started was to have full access to them. And I don't just mean hey, let's do an accountability interview and I'll get a couple shots inside Marineland and we'll call it a day. I really wanted to know, what is it like to be on the other end of this guy's Twitter machine? What is it like to be a hero in your hometown for decades with this business that everyone loves, that people come from thousands of miles to see, to all of a sudden being out of favor and soon to be even having whales in captivity, which is now illegal in Canada. So, you know, I really had a lot of questions about the human story. They have been defensive against the media and storytellers for many years, even before Phil came out, but certainly since Phil came out and the other employees came out, really they haven't given much access or really any access to media. So I expected it to be difficult. And I'm not sure how they viewed me, but certainly they were not interested in participating. But I was lucky that a lot of other people were, you know, and so I did speak to scientists who are pro-captivity, who say that we should have animals in captivity because we need to study them in order to combat the effects of climate change and various things. But so I did have a full picture when I was making the film, and I think I was treated more as a storyteller than an activist, although certainly you know, the activists were more forthcoming, of course, because I think they really really believe what it is that they're fighting for, and they wanted to give me as much information as possible. So.
The final question I wanted to ask you, oftentimes when I talk to documentarians, I'm always very interested to hear them talk about that eureka moment, either during filming or when in the editing bay where they go, this is the movie. I thought the movie was this, but this is the movie. In your case, I think you knew exactly what this movie was from beginning to finish, because obviously, again, as we said before, you have a goal in mind. Phil had a goal in mind. The legislature has a goal in mind. You know, it's going to come to a conclusion one way or the other, and and your story is his journey. But what I'm interested to hear, and because I have a moment in mind where I think it is, but I'm curious to hear you talk about a moment either during filming or in the editing bay that you loved, that moment that you caught it on camera, again, either as an interview was happening or as you were getting footage or as you were editing together a segment that really just kind of like knocked you, okay, this is why I went through the entire pain in the ass of making this entire thing. What was that moment for you?
So I've never been asked that question. I've done like 100 interviews, so I thank you. It's a brilliant question, honestly. So there are two moments that I can come up with. The first is a scene in the kitchen. I don't know if that's the one you're thinking of, but there's a scene that I shot quite early, actually, in the making of the film, within the first 2 months of production, where Phil is in the kitchen with his girlfriend, Christine, who was also a whistleblower. She was a trainer and became a whistleblower herself, and she had a very different journey. She was also sued. She had a different journey. I won't give too much away. But there was a moment there where something happens. He gets and we're live. We're shooting this. We're just shooting verite style. We're just capturing what's going on. There's a certain dynamic between them that I'm capturing, and I'm like, ooh, this is interesting. And so we're capturing this, and I'm staying pretty quiet. And then all of a sudden he's checking his phone, which he does all the time. And Marineland happened to release a blog about him and about how, he's out to get them, and, basically giving reasons why people shouldn't be believing what he says. And he's reading it to me, and then they accuse him of wanting money in there. And I don't know if I can swear in this interview, but
yeah, go ahead.
he says, they think I want money. I don't want money. I want the fucking walrus. And he just looks right at me and says it as if we're just having a conversation. And I'm like, he actually wants the walrus. Like, this is real. This isn't just a thing. This is real for him. And his girlfriend has a whole other reaction to what's going on. She's like, And so I think for me, that moment, both shooting it and in the edit suite, any configuration of the film I had, that scene was always in it. We're just trying to figure out where to put it and how it was going to be used. So that was a eureka moment for me, where I realized, number one, how heartfelt this was for him, how bizarre it is, and yet how true and vulnerable and real it is, So there was this, I had a real reaction to that. And then another one, which you might find surprising, but it was the opening shot of him where he's walking shirtless, which I bookend the film. So I open the film with him walking shirtless, and then at the end he's licking an ice cream, and it's the same shot. And he's walking barefoot, and he's just walking in his small town going to get an ice cream, and he's clearly aged since he left as a whistleblower, and he's certainly aged since he started as a 22-year-old kid working at Marineland with very different aspirations than how he ended up. And that, again, for me was an emotional moment, because I realized just how much he's been through and how much also nothing's changed all at the same time, And so, yeah, those are the two that come to mind, but I'd love to know yours.
Okay, all right. Well, first off, let me say also, my wife and I rescue dogs, and so the whole thing is Smooshi. Yeah. And as someone who rescues dogs and fosters them, and then finds homes for them, that got me, that nailed me.
Yeah.
But the moment I was thinking of, is the moment you captured when he gets information about John, the owner of Marineland. And when he receives that information, his response is uncommon. And it adds, for me, I was, I was going, because I was thinking as the filmmaker, I was thinking as you, and I was like going, that is a moment that makes him not just this firebrand, not just this flamethrower, but this guy with this deep well of humanity in him. And, that you go, okay, yeah, he is a pain in the ass. And it serves him, and then it doesn't serve him, but you go, but you have to have such great respect. And when that, if you didn't beforehand, then you freaking should have a great deal of respect for him, because that shows you that, that again, like I said, he's just not a bully boy, coming after somebody, or whatever, or a guy that just thinks he knows right and everybody else is wrong. It's like, no, he has a thing in him. He has that. Yes.
And you know what? I'm so glad you bring it up. And I can't believe that it didn't come to mind when you asked the question, because that moment was shot on Skype. So we learned that this thing had happened, and I was flabbergasted. We were all shocked. Nobody was expecting it. There was no lead up to this. So I got onto Skype with him, and he starts to have that reaction. And I just fumble for the record button, because I'm like, what's happening? What's going on?
Yes.
What is this? Because all I'd heard was anger before that.
Yeah.
And so when I got that, and that was so incredibly real, I was in my pajamas. I had my head like this, and it was a real emotional moment for both of us. But you're absolutely right that I think people who get the film get that scene, and people who don't, people who are coming into it thinking, well, I just want to learn about the animals, or I just want to learn about something else. They miss that, or they just don't understand it. And so I'm so honored and flattered that you got it, because it both reveals his authenticity, but it also reveals all of our human connection, that ultimately there can be love where there is hate. There can be grief where there is anger. These things can coexist. And even if we have a mortal enemy, we can still see something good in them, or and this life journey that he's been on, as flashy as it is on social media, has a real heart behind it. And I'm so glad that you that resonated for you.
Yeah, no,
It was definitely an oh my God moment.
Yeah, yeah. Well, listen, I have loved this conversation. I really am a huge fan of the movie, for all the reasons that I've already articulated. Congratulations on it, and it's been really great talking to you, Natalie.
Thank you.
Okay, all right. So there you go. All right.